Off. Great. So we're here for our next session of the day. It's another CPE program session. And this is grant reporting without the grind from data to donor confidence. Our agenda for today. I want to reshare. Something froze on me here. Okay. So our agenda for today is we're going to cover sorry, my screen. There we go. So we're going to talk about the instructor, which is me. We're going to talk about housekeeping, learning objectives, common challenges that we see in this reporting space. And we're going to, I'm going to stop sharing and just show you guys this way because I'm having issues on my monitor. Common challenges, key strategies to master for you. We'll go through some live examples and then we will wrap with Q&A. About the instructor, Mel already gave me a better introduction than I would give myself. So you all have this slide in your takeaway. This is in the resources as well in the materials. So in all of our sessions, you'll see a resources link where you can click that and view the resources for the session. You can scan the QR code to see my LinkedIn as well. As a matter of housekeeping, this is the second of our CPE sessions. So you've been to Budgeting 101 before this if you're looking to earn CPE. Our session after this will round out our CPE program, and then we'll have our roundtable, which concludes with the gift card drawing. Make sure that you've attended all our sessions in entirety, responded to the polling questions, complete the post-conference survey, which will be in Velixo Academy, and you'll also see in the follow-up email. Prerequisite that we had recommended for this, of course, is attended the session before this, which is Harry's excellent Budgeting 101, and other recommended knowledge that you have coming into this. Some basic understanding or intermediate even understanding of certain Excel concepts, such as the XLOOKUP function, if statements, data validation, dynamic arrays, and so forth. We will have the recordings available and select materials available as well, which you can get from Velixo Academy. So the first thing I'm going to do is kick us off with a polling question. So let me go ahead and launch that polling question. Or I might have to have Mel launch that polling question because my clicks are not cooperating.
Yeah, just a
But our
moment.
first, okay.
Oh,
So our first polling question that we're going to launch.
yeah. Trying to get to it.
Okay.
Got here the resources. Let me just see. Sorry, folks. We just need to get the polls and quizzes up. So poll number one, I'm launching it right now. All right,
Awesome.
let's go.
Okay, so poll question number one. When a funder gives you their own report format, what is your team's first instinct? So is your first instinct to copy and paste it from Sage Intacct? Try to rebuild it manually in Excel? Are you asking IT or finance systems people to generate it from the ERP? Or do you say, we'll figure it out later, hope for the best? Okay, we have a very good participation percentage here.
Let me know when you want me to end the
Okay.
poll.
Okay. I think I might be able to end it. Okay.
All right.
Great. All right. Great participation percentage. We'll end the poll. Fairly even split. I'll share the results out here. So uh, we're pretty evenly split between the top two options, which is you're either copying and pasting data from Sage Intacct into your template or trying to rebuild the report manually in Excel. The one that trails that is you're asking to generate it directly from the ERP. And nobody, thankfully, is saying we'll figure it out later and hope for the best. So that's a positive. Great. So learning objectives for this session. As this is CPE, we have to have learning objectives, right? So these are our learning objectives. I won't reread them. They were in the program description, but these are all the things that we are going to cover in this first part of the course. A lot of this focuses around being able to do mapping to funder-specific templates or unique structures that you're not going to typically be able to do in any accounting system or ERP. We do cover a little bit of write back. We also talk about data validation. All right, so great session that's going to build the foundation for our next one of the day. What are some of the common challenges that we see getting funder ready reporting in nonprofit organizations? Well, they're these ones. So this is based on my experience as a former nonprofit controller and CFO, also based on my experience working with a lot of folks like you as a consultant for ERPs, and I've also heard this directly from users too. So a line item free for all is challenge number one. Programs are going to submit a budget working with the funder, and in no way, shape, or form does this align to your chart of account and dimensions. However, you're beholden to now report in that format with that budget line item structure to the funder. So extrapolate that problem across a number of funders and a number of unique structures, and that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the challenge that kind of summarizes all that is there's an inability to work in an agile fashion across your chart of account and dimensions and tying that back to your funder specific line items. So it's inefficient to report that way. There's backlogs of reports that are due. People are burnt out. There's an audit risk to that. You may strain relationships with funders if that goes really bad. So that's a big challenge. Challenge number two, syncing up the calendars. A lot of grant or program reports have an award period, which may or may not align with your organization's fiscal year. So, natively in Sage Intacct, many of you may be familiar with this concept of a inception to date reporting period, which is supposed to be the answer to that. But as you know, probably it's not really the answer to that, right? Because it does not cover all the reporting periods that encompass any particular grant or program award period. So what you find yourself doing is creating and maintaining all of these additional separate reporting periods that magically align to the project start and end dates or the program grant start and end dates that you need to report on. Well, that's unsustainable. It's time consuming. It's error prone. People are very uh, prone to forgetting to do that or maybe doing it incorrectly. Right. So this is increasing reliance on things that are manually constructed. The consequence is, as most of you told me in the first polling question, a lot of you just say, forget it. I'm going to take it, export it to Excel, and try to figure that out. And now you're reporting with static, stale information. And when something changes, as Harry said in his first session, everything breaks down the line. Challenge number three that we're facing, which is what we call the rework overload. Rolling grant or program position analyses. So if I want to project forward, well, what does it look like I'm going to have left or I'm going to have overspent? Often that is a very manual exercise. Our budget, our forecast updates mean that we're reworking numbers into a usable import template format because nobody budgets in the import template format. Let's be honest about that. And then you also have the issue of calculating nuanced indirect, which often means offline work or manual journal entry and import rework. What do I mean by nuanced indirect? Indirect often has limits. You can or cannot charge indirect on this. Once you go over budget, there's no more indirect, right? You need to have things that can handle all those types of flexible needs. And all of this results again in more of what we call at Velixo copy and waste. By the time you're done manually updating, exporting, manipulating for all of these different curveballs that nonprofit life throws at you, your data is already outdated and you have to start all over again. So now that we've talked about some happy things, not really, let's go to polling question number two. So let's go ahead and launch that one. Okay, polling question number two. Which part of your current reporting process would benefit the most from automation? So would it be mapping your funder line items to the GL and dimension, refreshing data live, creating different time buckets for each grant or program, rolling forward budgets and forecasts? What would be
I have
most
a
helpful?
Sorry, I have a question for you, Jim. If
Yep.
somebody misses a polling question because they didn't answer in time, can they retake the poll question for the CPE credit?
If they want to just like put their answer in the chat to us, I guess we could at least have it documented. That
Wonderful.
would probably be the best way to do it, either the Q&A or the chat. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, Tom, if you're still listening, go ahead and just put your answer in the chat, and then we'll take that as read. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we've got good percentage of participation. This is about the same number that answered last time. I'll give you all a couple more seconds if anybody else wants to get a response in. All right, I think this is going to be it. So I'm going to end the poll. Oh, one more snuck in. Good thing I did that. Okay, two more snuck in. Great. Well, thank you. I'd love to see the engagement. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now. And this is what we have. I'll share the results out. A very, again, good spread. I think the number one is refreshing live data from Sage Intacct. Spoiler alert, that's what we do. And then number two would be mapping funder line items to GL accounts and dimensions. So those are our two highest. Not very surprising given the nonprofit audience, but great because we are going to cover those things. We're going to cover all these things really, but I'm glad to know where you all are at coming into this. So jumping to my next slide here, what are we going to do? Right. So what are some simple strategies you can adopt so your reports are going to be able to be more dynamic, more funder ready, and no longer rely on this constant manual intervention? Well, there's some strategies to reference. Don't be scared of what I'm about to show you. It's wordy on purpose because I'm trying to give you takeaway materials that you can use long after our session ends. Before we get into that, two general tips that are not necessarily Velixo specific, but are very helpful to know. Excel's dynamic arrays, which Harry covered in our first session as well, read up on them. These are one of the best things that you can master for modern modeling. They're going to take the amount of work and the amount of unique formulas that you have and drastically reduce them. And number two is, did you know that Microsoft has an alphabetical reference for every single Excel function? I've given you the link to that, so consider bookmarking the page for that as well. Super helpful. Now, strategies for success. These are all things we're going to go over in our session here. So these are relatively basic examples. They're going to help you automate funder-ready reports. And these are the types of needs. This is your potential strategy. And then you see the guidance or documentation that's going to tell you a little bit more about that if you need to read up on it later. I'm not going to read through these because we're going to go over them live, right? So in the interest of time, it's better to just go over them live. But this is a great takeaway. And again, you can find this linked in the resources, which you will be able to download the session materials here from Velixo Academy. So we got some great strategies to go over. To go through those strategies, we're going to do that via live examples. We have three live examples that I've prepared that we're going to go through together. These are going to progress, in, I guess, difficulty, if you want to call it that. But they're going to progress in just how we have to deal with things as nonprofit accounting and finance professionals. And this is all from real life. So the first is a funder financial report with simple mapping. How do we take what the funders line items are and map that to our ERP in a way that's going to be live refreshable? The second is a rolling grant position driven by expenses. So this is that idea of reviewing, forecasting our grant position, and showing where we think our grant is going to end up and being able to be flexible with that and adjust that as reality unfolds. And then the third is another flavor of that, but it's going to be based on revenue and expenses, right? So it's a nuance that I've seen a lot that I wanted to address because it's a use case that clearly people have. So toggling, getting out of my PowerPoint, and I'm going to stop share and reshare to hopefully make my screen a little bit cleaner. Okay, share here and reshare. Great. Okay, so we see here that we started on a template that a funder has given us. And this is literally something that I Googled, download, and decided I'm going to make this thing live, right? It's an example of a real report that a foundation asks nonprofits to complete when they fund them. Now, maybe what happens here in this kind of situation is that, unbeknownst to all of us in accounting and finance, our programs people and our funder have communicated back and forth. They've come up with a budget and we've been awarded the grant. And the funder says, here you go. This here that we're looking at is the report that you have to produce for me on whatever cadence that I ask you for. And one of the programs people forwards us this in an email. This is how this usually happens in life, right? And says, oh, we need this grant report for the funder. And usually the next thing they say is, oh, it's also due this week, right? Because not a lot of thought ahead sometimes. So your initial reaction might be panic, realizing that none of this aligns with the GL account and dimensions in your system, and you don't know how you're going to pull this together. So let's break down how something like this is actually very easy to achieve with Velixo. So here in the rows, the funder has given us what they want us to report on categorically, right? These are the budget line items that represent what they've agreed to fund us for. And from a column perspective, we at least know that they're very clear on the time periods that they want reflected in this report. So how do we make this happen without having to copy and paste all the time? Well, let's tackle the rows first. So when you find yourself in a situation like this, the very first thing that I would do is add myself some columns off to the side. And these are going to be our mapping. All right. So you'll see here that we've got mapping to align with whatever GL account and whatever other dimensions are relevant. So in this case, I chose a bunch of dimensions as an example. Yours may be two dimensions that constitute this line. Yours may be five dimensions. It's really user by user, org by org. All right, but you can have this mapping here. And I've got a completed example here off to the side. So I'm going to take this and copy and paste it, and then we'll talk a little bit about how I built this and why it's helpful. Okay. So let's say, for example, that I've got personnel expenses and I've got my counseling staff, right? That's a line item on the budget. Well, if you think back to the techniques that Harry showed us in session one of the ways that we can specify what we're pulling is by using a range, right? So we use a simple colon in between the accounts. So anything that's booked to GL account 5120 through 5122 in my example here, that's the GL account. Location. Well, what location is this recorded to? So Harry hinted at this as well in his first session. We have things in Velixo that we call filter or range expressions, right? So if I basically want to say, you know what, I don't really care what location this is booked to, it can be any location. One way we can do that is what you see right here on screen. There's an asterisk and a question mark. And that filter expression means anything, right? And that's what we're getting here. Now we may budget these particular staff to a particular department, so I can put that in. This may be a range of projects. Maybe this is a grant that's represented by a range of project codes. So I can put a simple range and say anything booked to project 160 through 162. Hey, that's this grant, and that's how I'm going to report on it. Again, employee, I don't care. And the other way to do I don't care, by the way, is simply leaving something blank, right? So I could say any item, right? Because I haven't specified a filter here. So by having these mappings lined up here for how you want each of these to be reflected, you've given yourself a tool that translates from your language to your funder language. Now that is step one. When we think about the next step, all that's really left is to get your data from Sage Intacct. And we're going to use the same kind of techniques that Harry showed in session one. One thing I want to point out as a note is it's generally very useful to have a tab like this off to the side, which I call an info tab or a reference tab, where you take things that, you may need to use this information. You don't necessarily revisit or update it often, but it's good to have it as a reference and also to have it out of the way of people that you don't want messing with it. Right. So I typically have an info tab, an options tab, a reference tab, whatever you might call it, off to the side where I've got certain information I'm going to be referencing. And here I've got that. I've got my project ID where I'm going to pull some of the main information from. I've got a budget ID I'm going to be using, and then I have different periods that are going to be going on the report. That keeps this relatively cleaner when I'm working with it. And then the last piece is simply to get my data, right? So I can make all of this live so that once I've set it up once, I don't have to keep messing with it, right? It's a simple refresh. So first thing I want to do is get my budget data. And we saw this in Harry's session before. We're going to use the SI budget turnover. What I'm going to do here is future-proof it even a little bit more because I think it's important to think ahead when you're building things like this and say what could change or what could go wrong and just put a condition in place that prevents that from being an issue. For example, if my GL account, right, which is here in A7, equals blank, then I want to just do nothing here, right? So return blank here, right? Or actually, I'll put a 0, right? So it's make it a 0. Otherwise, I'm going to use my SI budget turnover, which we saw with Harry in his class before. I've got my connection name, and then I just put in my arguments, right? So where does the account live? Oh, okay, that lives here in A7. Where's the budget ID? Well, that's one of the things that I had referenced over on my info tab. So I'm going to grab it from there. Where's the from date live? Well, I want the full range of the project. This is where it gets really hard in Intacct's native report writer, but not really hard in Velixo because I have the start date and the end date of my project on this sheet already. By the way, I pulled that live. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So I can reference these dates, right? And I think let's see, my budget ID is here. My from date is right here. My to date is right here. And then I could head back over to my walkthrough and pull the rest of the things that I need. So my location ID lives here. I don't care about books. And then dimensions. So one of the things Harry mentioned is dimensions. There's a couple ways to pull them. He showed you one way by selecting a range. Another way, we actually have a function called si.dimensions. And again, you always start our functions with your connection name. But after that, you just specify the pairs, right? So for example, the dimension I want is department, which is called out up here. And the value for department lives right here. And I can just keep passing those pairs for whichever dimensions I'm using in this particular example. And just as you would with plain old Excel, when you fix your references the right way, things move with you beautifully. All right, so here I've got what I need to pull my budget. So I'll hit enter there. I might have made a syntax issue, but it fixed it for me. So that's great. And we're going to see that it is retrieving because we've got that spin, the budget amount for this combination, which aligns to my funders line items. Now, all I have to do here is simply copy the formulas down. Now, this is different than what we saw before. Why is that different? Well, because a lot of times, rather than using something totally dynamic like some of Harry's examples did, a lot of these funder reports are pretty fixed in nature. It's like, hey, these are the line items. So if what you have doesn't align with one of these line items, then it probably shouldn't be on my report, right? So we can do it that way by simply copying the formula down. And of course, because we're in Excel, everything moved with us. And I've now got live budget data, and I'll just do some quick reformatting because it's one of the other things that we love to do when we create our Excel files, right? Is format them exactly the way we want. So I've got my budget data. Then I'm going to proceed to pull the actuals. And all I have to do to pull the actuals is use that same function that Harry showed us before, si.turnover. And I specify whatever the different arguments are. So again, I'm pulling an account from a specific spot. And then these are my quarterly columns, right? So I've got those built out for myself here on the info tab. My start date is here. My end date is here. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull my location ID. I don't care about books. And again, I'll use my SI dimensions function so that I can get the dimension pairs that I need. So I've got that. I'm going to pull my dimension ID. And then I'm going to do the same thing to get each of my pairs. So I've got employee. And last but not least, I've got item. Close that up. And I'm now going to be getting the turnover or activity for each of my funder line items for this particular period. And again, simply copy that down and fill in whatever. And of course, I don't have anything here, so we've got an error. Makes sense. Okay. And I'll go ahead and copy that down here. I'm not going to spend time reformatting it right now, but you get the idea. It's Excel, I can reformat. And then it's easier from that point on because all I have to do really is change the arguments for my start and end date because that's what changes in this particular example. So I know that my start and end date started in row 5 and they go down 1. So instead of clicking and going back to the sheet every time, I could just change simply my references because I know where these belong. Right, so my from date is in row 7 on my other tab. My to date is in row 7. And same thing for my dates here. So I've gone ahead and mapped these. And then I'm just going to do a big, copy and paste bonanza where I bring these down. To fill the different rows that they need to fill. Now, when you consider that once I've done this once, I never really have to do it again, that's pretty powerful. Okay, so if I close this up, I now have the funders line items mapped to my GL account and dimensions with flexibility to change it, of course. If something does change, I can change this over here, but this is done. Now, as things change, say I need to report for another time period. So let's say I'm now going to make Q1 4/1/21 to 6/30/21 just by changing my info tab here and changing those dates. When I come back here, you see this is loading, refreshing. I've got the new numbers. So this is live information in the funders line items ready to go. One thing I wanted to mention before I move to our next example is how did I get, because I mentioned the project start and end dates, right? So there's a couple ways to get that, and we'll see another even easier way to get it in our next session. But in this example, I use query using the same technique that Harry had shown earlier. And I was actually able to get the start and the end dates for the project. We also have a simple function, which is called si.project_start_date. And all I need for that is my connection name, the project ID, and there we have it. All right, so this is the same thing, just with a different date format, but I can retrieve that information on the fly. So imagine as I change my project ID, these dates will change in sync with that. That will feed my report. I don't have to do anything anymore in terms of copy and paste and reformatting and changing the data. It will change itself. So on to the next example. And this gets progressively more advanced, I will say, based on the things we need to deal with in nonprofit life. So next example here, this is basically a forecast, right? So it's a rolling grant position. Organizations do this when they're managing a budget and they're trying to make sure that they're going to come out in the right place at the end of their grant. This is often particularly important in multi-year awards because it can be challenging when you're trying to align. Okay, I'm looking at my reports traditionally, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time. But when I'm looking at grant reporting, I kind of need to consider the whole picture. What award amount did I get? What have I spent so far? What am I projected to spend? Where am I going to end up? All right, so this kind of exercise is very common. And of course, you're always trying to align to the funder's budget line items, right? Because I have a funder award where they've given me all these, strictly numbered line items, and each one of them represents something. Nobody has GL accounts for this, right? I don't have a GL account called program director. I don't have a GL account called driver. And I shouldn't when I have a system like Sage Intacct. There's no reason to do that. But aligning that is very difficult in standard reporting. So the first piece of the strategy here, as you might imagine, is that same mapping idea, right? I've got my columns out here, and it allows me to do the degree of mapping that I need to do to align to my funder's line items, right? So when I have program director, oh, well, that means this person, and here's the ways that that's going to be coded. So all of that is mapped so that it can be live refreshable. But somebody looking at a report can just look at it in their language. Now, in our quest to make this more dynamic, there's a couple of additional strategies to cover here. On the lookups tab, which as I mentioned is a good recommended best practice. Uh, on the lookups tab here, I've got some listings from Sage Intacct. I don't want to keep manually maintaining my list of budgets, my list of projects, and I shouldn't have to because Velixo is going to automate that. So I spoke about the usefulness of a tab like this before. All this information you're seeing is direct live from Sage Intacct. For example, my list of budget IDs, my list of project IDs. As Harry said earlier in his session, not everybody thinks in numbers, not everybody thinks in IDs. Well, we have a function here that retrieves the name. The syntax of that is very simple. What's our connection name? Where does the project live? Again, we're referencing that dynamic array that is naturally returned by a Velixo expand type function. Right, so all of that is there. Now, a lot of times people are used to seeing it like this. So you can use plain old Excel, right, to join all this information together and give people a list of projects. Now, how's somebody actually going to interact with something like this? Again, we can continue to use plain old Excel. So that's the great part about Velixo truly being based in Excel is that we could take this information and create a drop-down validation list like this that says, oh, here's the different projects that exist in my environment. Which one is relevant for this report? And how do we do that? Using regular data validation, which is standard Excel functionality. So when I look at my data validation, this list is simply pulling from the project or grant list here, which is an array. So this list will actually automatically update and contract and expand itself based on changes that you make in Sage Intacct. So you have a fully live, up-to-date list of your project and grant IDs that you can toggle with at any given moment. And the same is true of our budgets, right? So here I'm able to pick, hey, what's my primary budget and what's the budget ID maybe I'm using for a forecast. Again, this is an example. It's not necessarily saying you have to do it this way, but I see a lot of people do things like this, so I think it's pretty useful. Now, another strategy, right, is that typically when we have these, multi-year type of arrangements, they're not going to line up with our fiscal year. Like it's very rare and lucky that we get an award that cleanly aligns with the fiscal year that we follow, especially if we're not following a calendar year as a nonprofit. That's when it tends to happen even more that our funding agreements don't align with our organization year. So, how do we handle that? Well, if I open up some of my hidden columns, this is another strategy that Harry alluded to in his session. Information that you need, give yourself extra space, right? And park that somewhere. But you could also collapse it with standard Excel like grouping so that you only see it if you need to. Anyway, those functions I showed you before, the project start and end date, well, they're sitting here and they're saying, hey, whatever the project ID is, which by the way, I found by using a standard lookup, right? Because I've got here my friendly presentation, but I use what we call XLOOKUP, which is standard Excel, to figure out just the ID number. And I'm using that to then say, hey, here's my start date for the project. Here's my end date for the project, which is the dimension, and some other information that I peppered in there using query. And using that information, I can then set the bounds of what should I be able to report on. As I change this, so let's say, for example, I change this to project or grant 630. Maybe the same funder gives us this. Look at all this changing live. So I see the project start and end dates have changed. This information has changed. All of this information underneath me is changing and transforming so that I can see the picture for that particular project or grant. All of my columns are transforming to the correct start and end dates. And all of that without me having to do anything else because of the way that I thoughtfully designed this. Now, this project or grant has zero activity because that's not the one for this example. But I wanted to highlight how quickly everything automatically changes. And then when I change this project or grant, how quickly it all changed back. What makes that possible? Because this is another thing that you may know very difficult to do, if not almost impossible, in native financial report writer to make it a project or grant specific expansion like this that's dynamic. Well, all I needed to do here was get my reporting periods, right? So I already have my start and end dates. I need to just figure out, okay, what reporting periods exist? And I used Intacct's query for this, or rather Velixo's query of Intacct data. And what this does, I'll show you how we build this in the next session. It's actually all driven by point and click because we have a built-in query builder. So this function that may look scary, I didn't write a single letter of it myself. It was all point and click. It expanded out the reporting periods that are applicable to this particular project or grant. My start date, we have functions that can help us with that, right? So I've got my start and end date, and then I've got an end date that I want to use for the report, right? So all of this fully automated and gives me this presentation. How do we get this other data? Well, we've seen this before too. For example, how do I get my budget information that I'm using and reporting on here? This is the SI budget turnover function. All we're doing is using that function, which we've seen several times now, and just referencing arguments that exist elsewhere on the sheet. How do I get my actual data? This is the SI turnover function, right? So the activity based on the periods and based on the dimensions we're using gives me that information. And then I've got regular Excel functions mixed in. So for example, I've got a if statement here that says, based on the dates. So let's evaluate the dates, for example. Right. So if the date for this reporting period is greater than the date here, I'm going to display one type, so it's actual results. Or if I'm looking at future information, I'm going to display projected results. This again is an array formula. I entered it once, and it expands automatically across my data. The same is true for all of this, right? So I basically have an if statement combining standard Excel with Velixo that says, hey, if I want actual data, use the SI turnover function. If I don't want actual data, which is my projected data, then use the budget. And I've now created a dynamic rolling, basically forecast view of what my grant's going to look like. And that's just with one formula per row that information spills on over. What do I typically do from here? This is a nice report summary type output that tells me, all right, this is what the picture looks like. We know that in real life, when we do budgeting forecasting, we are often perpetually adjusting this information. We're like, oh, this assumption changed, this assumption changed, this line needs to go up, this line needs to go down. That's the reality of nonprofit life today. So, how do we handle that? Typically, people will have a model, right, where they've got something like an adjustment section. And they're going to say, okay, again, keeping in line with this mapping, what am I going to adjust up and down? And I can put in my adjustments for whatever period I might want to put them in. Now, when you do something like this, our ultimate goal may be to write this information back to Sage Intacct. So to send this in as like updated budget figures or an updated forecast figure so that I can pull that information for reporting easily. If that's the case, the only thing to look out for that I wanted to highlight, when you write back budget data or send budget data to any ERP system, you can't tell it, I want to send the budget to this range of accounts. That's unfortunately not how life works, as much as many of us wish it did, myself included. Right. So when you write that information back, you need to just pick, okay, where am I going to map this to for budgeting purposes? And this will be the GL count and dimensions that that budget is going to flow back to. Now, let's say, for instance, I'm looking at this budget, based on my preliminary forecast right now, it looks like I'm going to have some remaining or an overage here. But maybe I know that, this overage, for instance, that we're projecting is not real, right? Maybe it's not going to be as extreme. So I'm going to maybe knock 15K off of this. So I can go to my meal costs line and I could say, at some point in the future, maybe like in January, we're going to take 15,000 down because we know there's going to be some change. Okay. And then I have over here, and this is kind of just a best practice, what I call a pro forma. So the idea behind this is before we write anything back to the ERP, let's look at, does this look like it's going to make sense, right? So this kind of gives us that picture. By the way, you have all these example files in your materials that are already built. So this shows us, okay, let me, figure out what the end picture looks like. We see a lot of standard Excel formulas, right? We're not going to spend time covering standard Excel formulas in today's session that figure out what the amounts are going to look like so that when I go to write back, I'm confident in what I'm planning to write back to the system. And then the write back, Harry showed us how we build this write back session, this write back budget function in his earlier session. One thing I do want to call out for this write back budget function is there's another piece that can help make this be more dynamic. So let's say, for instance, when I do this write back, when I send this budget information back to Intacct, the only columns that I care to write back are my forecast columns. Hypothetically, if that's the case, there's a standard Excel function that people may or may not be aware of, and it's called filter. Right. So when I'm writing back my budget and I get to the part where I specify which reporting period should I be writing back, I can filter my list of reporting periods, which by the way is up here in row 2. So let me just unhide that for you so you get a good picture. I could filter my list of reporting periods here. And the syntax of a filter function in Excel is simply What is the array or list of values that I want to evaluate? What is my criteria, right? So include means these are the ones that should come through. Well, I want to include any time where this row underneath it says forecast. And what that means is if the row underneath it does not say forecast, I'm not going to include that in what I'm passing through. So that's basically what a filter function does. Incredibly useful modern Excel function that I use a lot. And then same thing here when I get to the amounts. What amounts do I want to write back? Well, the amounts are going to sit here, but I only want to write back the amounts where this row above it is equal to forecast. Right? So I'm putting a filter into that. You see, we can seamlessly weave in these standard Excel functions with the Velixo functions, and they just play in harmony because we're actually built in Excel. So finishing that, hitting enter, we see a whole bunch of pending because, well, we're evaluating whether or not this has been written back yet. It has not been written back yet, therefore we see pending. If I want to send this to Intact as my updated forecast, because I have these cells that have my write back formula in it already, it is simply a matter of going to my Velixo and X ribbon, perform write back on the current sheet. When you do that, you see our status pane opens up. The write back is in progress, meaning, hey, we're working on sending this data back to Sage Intacct. And as soon as that finishes, we are going to see the result. Right. So as the write back is processing and sending many, many months of data and many lines of data over to Sage Intacct, uh, you could go do whatever you want while that's happening. But when it finishes, we're going to see, there we go, line uploaded. So all of these lines have been uploaded to Sage Intacct. And they've been sent to this mid-year recast, right? So when I look at what my forecast amount is going to be, I expect it to be this, 4,792, or 4,792 rather. So if I come back over here to my report output, of course, what I can do then is simply refresh this sheet to pick up the fact that I've just sent a budget over there. And when I refresh, what that's doing is updating everything here with my information from Sage Intacct. And so this is going to be a live pull of data, of course. And the information is updating. We see this happening. And the data will be live in my report. And that's done. And we see this forecast number ties to what I had over there. Now, again, the beauty of this, I don't want to keep refreshing this every month. When I get to next month and I'm looking at October, I change the date. All of this is updating. Look at the wheels turning. So all this information is updating. It's already updated. I see a projected forecast has been updated, my actuals, all of this information. I see over here, the line between actual and projected is automatically changed, and what's being pulled is automatically changed. By the way, one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, but is very good to know, all this is drill downable within Excel. If I right click on it, or if I go on the Velixo NX ribbon and click drill down, when I click drill down, this is actually going to show me for this combination of GL count and dimensions that represents your line. Here's what you're looking at. Right, so it's going to go find all of the detail behind that and display that to you in another tab that you can very conveniently sort and filter any way you want. And that's coming up here. Now, as I'm waiting for that, one other thing that I'm going to do is check the chat. All right, so if I look at the chat and see if there's any questions or anything in here, I don't think there are any questions in the chat, so that is great. Um, and in the Q&A, I don't know if I see anything in the Q&A either.
No,
All
we
right.
we answered all of them.
Okay, awesome.
We
Great.
do have one remaining polling question. We're ready whenever you are.
Okay, yep, we'll get to that in 1 minute. So this is the drill down presentation, right? So as you drill down, this is actually going to the details of what's there for all those combinations of dimensions. And when you click view transactions, now this is also going to take you to all the different transactions that have been recorded. So we have a couple levels of drill down. We have what we call this summary drill down, and then we have this more detailed drill down, which you get for view transactions. And then the very last piece that you'll get within drill down is actually the ability to drill all the way back to Sage Intacct, right? So if you click the link in your second drill down sheet, this will open up a window in Sage Intacct that will show you the transaction itself, right? So for example, here I've got my transaction. If I wanted to view it, I click View Batch, and that's going to open up Sage Intacct in my browser, which I think I'm probably already logged into. And that's going to give me the ability to look at the transaction inside Intacct. I'm not logged in at the moment, but once I log in, it would take me there. So with that, we're coming up towards the end of our session. So I do want to pop back over to my slides, and then we'll launch that polling question. Yes, we are at polling question 3. So let's go ahead and launch that, please. All right. So our last polling question here. If your reports could automatically adjust to each project or grant's start and end dates, what would that change for you? So would that be less rework, calendar confusion, more confidence in what's current, easier handoff between finance and programs, or would that perhaps be all of the above?
If I can add for those of you that are not seeing the pop-up poll and you're not able to answer it, if you leave your answer in the chat, we at least have a recording of it. And that way
Right.
it can help us with the CPE credits. So specifically for Danae, they had a question that they asked and just wanted to give you a chance. If you're not seeing the polling option, chat is an option since everything is time-stamped. And if we get audited, we can bring that to the fore.
Yep. This is great. We're at about 80% participation. I think this is everybody that answered last time. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now, share out the results. The majority, the overwhelming majority of you said all of the above. As a former nonprofit controller and CFO, I would tend to agree. I didn't have this when I was a nonprofit controller and CFO, and I really wish I did for all these reasons. Right? So great. Thank you all for sharing. With that, this is the end of our session here. I do have this Q&A slide, right? We've got our QR code here. So if anybody at any point is interested in scheduling a further demo, we do have these QR codes at the ends of our slides, which will make it easy for you to scan that and book that. But we do have another session coming up. I won't talk anymore about that. Actually, I'll let Mel handle that. But thank you all for attending this session, and I'll turn it back over to Mel.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Jim. I don't know about you folks, but I'm pretty sure there's stuff that we showed today, like so far, that you could use right away. Like I'm sure you can think of 5 different things you could do thanks to what Jim has shared just in the last hour. We are giving you a 30-minute break. So we will be reconvening at 1:45 Eastern. So that's in roughly 36 minutes. For those of you, many of you have been following us from the very beginning, which is great. That means that you've got good odds of winning that $250 Amazon gift card. Again, we're really thankful that you're investing in yourself by taking the time to learn and not just earn CPE credits, but also go through the journey. So, for all of you, if there are no further questions, we're going to wrap up this session. We will see you in 35 minutes with Jim, and he's going to continue what he's been talking about, but he's going to talk about follow the funder lines. So mapping the mission by automating grant templates and funder reports. So I hope to see you there. So two more sessions to go. The next one's going to be great. And then we have our final session with our fantastic panelists, which I'm very excited about. So have a great lunch. Enjoy that sandwich or whatever it is that you want to eat. Make sure that you stay hydrated, and we will see you in 35 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.